Welcome back to Questing Beast, I'm Ben. Today we're taking a look at Forgotten Realms Adventures in Faerun. Now, if you've been a long-time follower of my channel, this might be a little bit shocking to you because I don't typically look at D&D 5e products. In fact, I don't think I've ever looked at any adventures from 5th edition specifically. And to be honest, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to look at it today. 5e has been making rules and adventures for more than 10 years now, and I want to take a look at what is the current state of adventure design in 5th edition. There are so many amazing adventures that have been published for D&D, but not by Wizards of the Coast, that I've covered on this channel because I do a lot of adventure reviews. Has Wizards of the Coast learned from those adventures? Has the way that the layout is done, the way that the adventures are structured, the kinds of encounters and the kinds of challenges that players face, are those things learning from the wider community of adventure writers? Another reason why I picked up this book in particular is because it fills a niche that I've been wanting to be filled for a long time. A number of adventure campaigns have been published previously that are in the Forgotten Realms, but if you're just starting out D&D and you want to explore this famous setting for Dungeons & Dragons, can you just dive into the world? Can you travel in any direction? Is there enough information about the world that the game master can come up with things on the fly or sprinkle in little adventures for you to encounter? Until this point, that hasn't really been the case, but now it is. This book contains not only descriptions of all the major areas in the Forgotten Realms, but it contains 50 short adventures that you can just drop wherever you want. That's really smart. That's a very OSR approach to creating a setting. But of course, the bigger question is, are those adventures any good? Which is what we're going to look at today. First thing I want to note here is that this is the special edition cover, and I actually really like this cover design. Most 5e books I think are really bland looking, but this is just absolutely gorgeous. It has these gold letters that are imprinted into the texture of the page, or into the texture of the cover. It wraps all the way back around to the back. This is part of a 2-book set. This is the Dungeon Master expansion, where it has the world of the Forgotten Realms, and there's another one for players that add more player options and stuff, so they can sell to the game masters and the players. The inside end pages are being used, which is nice. They're being used as a world map. In the player's book, there's actually a full-size map that you can take out and unfold on the table, which is really nice looking, but not in the GM's guide, which is a little strange. You'd think that map would be in the GM side. In terms of the actual design work, it's hard to say who is writing which adventure. I don't know if it's actually listed here. Lots of different people worked on this because this is produced by Wizards of the Coast, the largest RPG publisher in the world. They probably have more employees and more resources than any other RPG company out there. So does that translate into a book that is really great to use for dungeon masters, especially new dungeon masters? The main chapters of the book include Running the Realms, so an overview of the Forgotten Realms and the kinds of stories you might want to focus on there, a breakdown of all the major regions like the Dale Lands, Icewind Dale, the Moonshae Isles, Baldur's Gate. There's one extended adventure in here because most of the adventures are super short, but there's a longer one to kind of get you up through the first couple levels. And then there's some magic items and a bestiary at the back. One thing that really surprised me in a good way is that the physical construction in this book seems a lot better than the earlier 5e books I've looked at. There's actually sewn signatures. So there's sewn binding holding all of these pages together, which means it's going to last a lot longer than a typical glue-bound book. But let's dive right into these adventures and see how well they hold up. They're structured really well. In fact, these are pretty much all one-page dungeons, which kind of blew my mind when I first looked at it. One-page dungeons or one-page adventures are a fantastic idea, frequently used in the OSR. In fact, there is a one-page dungeon competition that goes on every year for people to write these things. These things stick with control panel layout, which means that everything you need to know is on one page or on a 2-page spread. There's no flipping back and forth. You can just look at that page and go with it. There's some other nice touches here where there's a good map. All of the rooms are named instead of numbered, which is smart. That speeds up comprehension so you can see immediately what the room is. They're all labeled with what level they're for, and even the kind of adventure. This is a deity type adventure for level 1. So on the surface, when I look at this sort of thing, it looks like the influence of indie RPGs and the OSR is actually having an impact. These adventures look much easier to run at a glance than what we see in a lot of big 5e campaigns, which I've flipped through in the past, which have these long run-on chapters and things moving from one page to another. Things are hard to find. This is all easily referenceable. But then I started actually reading them. In The Curse on Humble Hill, the situation is that the hamlet of Humble Hill is beset by failing crops, sickly livestock, and illness. And it turns out that this is all being caused by Algar Gaunt, a mage apprentice who sold bad fertilizer that is making all everyone's crops go bad. You need to seek him out and bring him to justice. So how does this adventure actually go? Step 1 is finding Gaunt. You need to search the region to figure out where this guy went to. And as you search it, you're going to get random encounters, which are over here. You can roll on those. After each encounter, a character can make an intelligence check, investigation, and if it's successful, you find a clue that takes you to his lab. Of course, the question is, what happens if you don't pass those checks? This is a classic case of an investigation depending entirely on players passing certain rolls. And if they don't, then it just can't proceed forward. Very weird. There are not even any concrete clues that would give you in order to take you to this place. You just have to make these up as you go. And what happens if you finally make it to his actual lab? Well, you travel in through here, and there is a psychic gray ooze in a puddle that you can fight. What's in the rest of the rooms? Nothing. Nothing is keyed for them at all. Now, because they are keyed with a name, you could make up some objects in them, but by default, there's really nothing interesting there to find. There's a trash pit over here, so maybe there's some trash, some fertilizer, some empty cages. What are you doing as you're traveling through here? Well, you're just trying to find this one guy. He's over here. If you try and fight him, he runs all the way back through here and up this ladder to the surface, and you have to chase him down. That's the whole adventure. As someone who reads and reviews and plays lots of low-level adventures, this sort of thing just doesn't cut it today. It's extremely linear. It's gated by these intelligence checks that you have to pass. And then when you get to the actual location-based adventure, and I love location-based adventures, there's nothing to do here. Now, you might respond to that. This is a one-page adventure. There's really not a whole lot you can fit onto here. It's going to be extremely minimal. And that's not true either. Go onto the one-page dungeon contest and just download the winners from the last 10 years of it. Enormously complex, rich, interesting, entertaining adventures can easily be packed onto one page if you know how to write them correctly. As one example, this is a book I wrote called Summer's End that is just full of one-page adventures. So, for example, here's the dungeon the Alchemist's Repose. We've got a map of the area, and there's, 8 or 9 rooms here. There's a loop, so there's different ways that you can travel around the environment. You can travel down here, you can climb up to this room, you can go around this way. It loops around this way through a secret door, so there's plenty of exploration that you can do. There's interesting things happening in every room. And especially there are dynamic elements that I added where you have these constructs, these robots that are marching around that are doing different tasks, including attacking you possibly. But they have punch cards that you can remove and slot into other constructs, reprogramming them to do what you want them to do. A good adventure is not just a sequence of scenes that the game master presents to the players. It should involve actual player choices and real interactivity. All right, but that's just a level 1 adventure. Maybe that's just there to introduce players to the basic mechanics and get them used to how the game works. What happens as we progress further into the book and we start getting into new locations and higher level adventures? Will things improve from there? We'll take a look at that right after this word from our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Into the AM, my favorite online apparel store. They've got lots of really comfortable options available right now, including button-up shirts like this one. They've got great graphic tees. They have hoodies, which are perfect for fall, and even jeans. I've tried almost everything that they sell, and I am a huge fan. It's really comfortable, and it lasts for a long time too. I've gotten random compliments from strangers on the streets about my t-shirts. And my wife likes the t-shirt so much that she keeps stealing them from my wardrobe to put into hers. They've got great deals all November long, and if you use my link, which is down in the description below, you can get an extra 10% off on top of that. Big thanks to Into the AM for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to it. So the second adventure is the Robber Baron, where you have to rescue a man from some desperate bandits. This seems a little bit more interesting. There's a number of different bandits, and they're not immediately hostile, so there's a little bit of social interaction here. This seems a little bit more promising. But the first thing I noticed is that there is no map. The map for this is found in the Dungeon Master's Guide. The book doesn't tell you that you need the Dungeon Master's Guide when you bought it, but then you start realizing that the adventures, or some of the adventures in the book, require you to have that book and to flip back and forth between this and a separate map in a separate book in order to run it. You don't have that book, you basically can't run the adventure. Frankly, I find that just bizarre that you would do such a thing like that. Is it to try and get you to buy a separate book? Maybe, but you're not going to know that when you buy this originally, so I guess we'll just move on. Next adventure is the Siege of Shale Spire Priory. And this is a siege adventure. That is kind of interesting, right? It's a new type of encounter that you might have. There's different tactical considerations that you're gonna have to think about if you're under siege. We don't see a lot of that in D&D, so I was excited to see how they did that. And do you want to know how they did that? It's a series of scripted combat encounters. That's it. That's what the siege is. You hang out inside the building and waves of guys attack you over and over. What's going on in all of these rooms? You got a temple, a vault, dining hall, a sanctuary. You don't know. They're basically unkeyed. The vault has a couple potions of healing, which can be useful if you can get in there and you know about the secret door. And there is a spell of Hallow around here that's going to prevent fiends from entering it. So it could be a place of last resort as you retreat. But this is still scripted as just a bunch of people that you fight over and over until eventually the cavalry arrives and you win. This is not an adventure designed for out-of-the-box thinking. It's not designed with tricks or traps that you can turn against the enemies. There aren't secret exits, like if there was one down here that led back to the road where you could loop around and strike the enemies from behind. Despite the building being sieged by 100 raiders, they, in action movie style, only attack you in small groups of 3 at a time, making sure it's always level appropriate until you drive them off. The adventure is not designed to feel like a real place where you make real decisions. It's designed to feel like a Disneyland ride. Or take this adventure, The Weeping Goddess. One nice thing I could say about it is that there are at least a few different ways to approach this adventure. You can go in through the shrine and find this secret passage. You can take this flooded tunnel or even go in through this way. That's nice, I guess, because I guess players can feel like there's a little bit of agency in terms of how they want to get in there. But once again, the actual structure of the adventure is just you fight a bunch of guys, and then you fight these guys, and then you fight these guys, and then you win. When it comes to D&D adventures, I feel like the absolute bare minimum is that if I'm paying for a book, it should at least be better than what I can come up with on the fly. And most of these do not meet that level. I feel like basically any DM, even relatively new ones, can just plop down a random location and then come up with 3 waves of monsters you have to fight. But it's just that over and over and over again. Here's Fury Grove, where you cleanse a corrupted forest shrine. First you get to the outer circle, where you fight these guys. Then you get to the inner circle, where you fight these guys. Then you get to the middle, where you fight a boss. After reading through adventure after adventure here, I eventually started coming to the conclusion, as weird as it sounds, that the largest RPG publisher out there, that's owned Dungeons & Dragons, the biggest RPG, for, 25 years, doesn't seem to know how to write D&D adventures. Or at the very least, conceives of a D&D adventure as just a series of scripted fights. This is very weird as someone coming from the OSR or just from the indie RPG space in general, where the emphasis is put so much on player agency and on exploration and on making adventures more of a situation where both the players and the game masters don't really know how it's going to go. Instead, the designers at Wizards of the Coast seem to conceive of adventures in the same way that a day one game master might. They see the monster manual, they see that it's full of things to fight, and they think, well, D&D is just about fighting a bunch of monsters over and over again. And if there's a dungeon, the dungeon is just a sequence of rooms in which you fight those monsters. The vast range of possibilities in D&D in terms of how you can create these scenarios that allow for real player interaction and choices and a true sense of danger and adventure seems to have not sunk in at all. It seems to be a totally foreign concept. Now, perhaps there are other D&D adventures or campaign books that are much better at that than this book. I don't know. I haven't read that many of them. I'm just going by what I am reading here. That being said, there are parts of this book that offer a little bit more hope. There's these sections that are essentially gazetteers that are describing the different regions of the Forgotten Realms. And then within that, they have these more narrow locations and these quick write-ups of what's going on there. These things are much more close to what I would consider an old school style situation, where rather than giving you a sequence of things that are going to happen there, it tells you who's living there, what's going on, what are some possible threats there. And then, of course, you would have to build a scenario around that. But by keeping it looser and making it more of a situation, it allows for a lot more creativity and a lot more variety of approaches. Unfortunately, some of them are still kind of vague. For example, we got Castle Crag here, which is thousands of years ago, the Drow built this castle. Over time, the fortress has been occupied by many different bad guy groups. It's been burned to the ground more than once. That's nice. You get a good sense of the level of ruin that it has. Now it's a sprawling, half-buried labyrinth home to undead, forest creatures, and outlaws. So it's a good adventure site where you could put some cool things in there. But there's not like a central, interesting conflict that would immediately spark an adventure idea. For example, you could say that there's now like 2 different evil factions that are both trying to move into this area and make it to their base of operations. So now there's some things there that you can grab onto. There's something there for the players to manipulate, to get involved in. Or we might have the Shalane Freehold, which is a homestead that a bunch of halflings have built here. and they welcome travelers. They hope to enlist them to deter goblin raiders, so maybe there's a bit of opportunity for adventure there. And it just describes where it is and the number of people that are there. But again, it needs more of a conflict. Who is threatening them right now? Maybe there's people in the town who have left to try and defeat whatever forces are threatening them, and they haven't come back, and you need to help them with that. It doesn't need to be complicated, but there needs to be more of a hook. As I said before, there needs to be more here than you could come up with on the fly, because that's what all game masters are going to be doing anyway. And too many of these have descriptions of, oh, it's just a town, and there's some nice people there, and there's 3 houses, and there's 20 people. Well, I could have thought of that myself. One thing I did think was cool was that each of these different regions have ideas for bastions, where you can set up your own fortress and kind of start building your own base of operations in each of these places. There's often a location that's specifically good for that. There's often even a list of people who would make good hirelings that you can enlist to help you at your bastion. I assume that these rules are fleshed out more in like the Dungeon Master's Guide, which I haven't read, but the idea of each of these regions having a place for you to build a base is really neat. I like that. I even think the encounters aren't too bad either. Rather than just being you fight some wolves or you fight some wargs, it often describes what they're doing and what their motivations are, which automatically makes things more interesting. Like there's an elf scout captain and some scouts, they patrol the forest and observe the party from hiding. So how they're going to react to you is going to depend on what you do. Or maybe there's some goblin warriors that are hunting for easy prey. So if you put on a show of force and you look really intimidating, they might just avoid you. These are these little elements of interaction that you want to see all throughout your adventures. The last thing I really want to look at is Chapter 7, which is the longer, more fleshed out adventure. This is supposed to take you from level 1 up through level 3 or so, and it's mostly a dungeon crawl, which I think is great. I think dungeons are great for Dungeons and Dragons. Especially if you're a new game master, it gives you a lot of structure, which is very helpful. The gist of it is that you're trying to find this lost magic book, or it's a book of poisons by this orcish wizard or orcish alchemist. And this one wizard hires you because her friend has gone off to seek it and claim it for her own, and you need to kind of get there first. But the wizard's already gotten there first, and you'll have to have a conflict with them. It starts off with this quite extensive back history about who the wizard was and what they were up to, but that really doesn't come up very much in the adventure. Maybe it'd be fun to just read his backstory. The dungeon is a lost library and exists on 2 levels. So this is the first level, and then you can descend down over there to level 2. And that's basically the whole adventure. There are some elements here that I think work. For example, there is a bit more exploration going on here in the sense that there are loops. There's more than one way to get to different rooms. For example, if you head over this way, there is a portcullis that is blocking your way to get to this room. And the lever to raise it is on the other side of the portcullis. So you're kind of stuck unless you can think of an out-of-the-box way to move this lever, maybe with Mage Hand or some other spell, or even just a clever use of equipment. I love stuff like this. I think it's really good that there is a short but difficult way or a longer but maybe easier way. There's also another possible shortcut over here as well. If you head around through here, you're going to find a bear, which you fight in this cave. One weird thing here is that there's this, on the map, there is a tunnel leading over to here, but as far as I can tell, it's not described anywhere in the book what's going on with this tunnel or where it's going. Is this another possible entrance to the library? If so, that would be really good to know, because it's always great when you have multiple entrances, but it's just not gone into at all. In this room, the display room, there is a trap in the corner that's in the shape of a big wolf, and if it gets activated, then it fills the room with poison gas. One nice thing is that it actually describes how to deactivate it physically. There's actually a switch inside the wolf's mouth that you can reach in and flick. I really like that because I like that there to be a way to disable traps without just rolling dice. I want players to physically interact with the environment. So that was a nice touch. This room also has a little glass sphere with a being trapped inside that wants you to free it. And if you do, it actually keeps its word to help you and will help you on this level at least. That's a fun little piece of interaction because you got to decide whether you're going to trust this being. Is it like an evil genie that's going to really mess you up if you let it free? So it's cool that you can kind of get a new ally by playing your cards right. But once you get down to the second level, there really isn't a whole lot to do. You're mostly going from room to room. Oftentimes there's not a lot in these rooms, except maybe a couple of guys that you have to fight. Every time they get close to something interesting, they kind of intentionally nerf it. For example, in room 9 over here, there's a summoning chamber where there's a summoning circle on the floor. And if you pass the correct check, then you figure out how it works and you can summon a beast to help you. That's cool, because what beast can you summon? Can you try and find the right kind of creature that would help you in whatever circumstance you happen to be in right now? And the answer is no. The spell only summons a land spirit which resembles a wolf. That's all that you can do. So any kind of like creativity or out of the box thinking is done away with. There is a mimic that's hiding in one of the rooms, and there's some evidence that it has eaten someone. So I guess that's kind of like a little mystery that you can solve if you find the trail of blood and figure out that this one wardrobe basically is a mimic. That could be an entertaining little side quest. But for the most part, the adventure is fight these guys and then move to the next room and then fight the guys in there. At the back, there is a bestiary going through a bunch of new monsters you might find in the Forgotten Realms. They often have really long and elaborate stat blocks. I know that's just how 5e goes, but they're often just, I think, more complex than they need to be. And they're often missing stuff that I would really want to know if I was running a D&D game. The bestiary in the RPG The Land of Eam, which I reviewed recently, is a really good example of this, where that's a game for kids, really. But its monster descriptions have things like, how would you negotiate with this monster? What does it want? How does it fight? What is it like when you beat it? What is it like when you lose to it? You need more than just stats and attacks when it comes to these creatures. You want to interact with them. So you need to have a much better sense on what they're like and how they behave. And oftentimes these books just are missing that. I do appreciate how on the back there is a calendar for the Forgotten Realms, though. That's a thing that a lot of people don't track in big campaign worlds, keeping track of what day it is, what is the season, and like what are the festivals and things like that. I think that's neat. More people should keep track of that sort of thing. So that's Adventures in Faerun. It was very enlightening to read, let's put it that way. While the books often look very pretty and they're very professionally produced and so forth, there seems to be a real lack of, I don't know, what do you want to call it, institutional knowledge in Wizards of the Coast in what adventure design can look like today. Some elements of modern design seem to be incorporated, like the one-page dungeons and more of a tendency towards control panel layout, but a lot of the basic principles of how to make highly interactive adventures just seems to be lost. The vision of what a D&D adventure is seems to be highly constrained, where even when you have a location-based adventure, it's a series of scripted scenes that are played out in a particular order. And when you do have a case where players are given more freedom, then they're mostly just free to fight monsters in maybe a different order. I suspect that a big part of this is just the rate of turnover at Wizards of the Coast. Wizards of the Coast seems to fire most of their D&D team and then rehire them in waves over the years. This seems to have happened multiple times from what I hear. And as a result, you tend not to have people that have been there for a long time and have built up this knowledge in how to structure these things properly. Instead, over and over, we're getting these adventures that look like they're written by someone who is writing their first D&D adventure. Now, I'm not the sort of person that's just going to hate on Wizards of the Coast because they're Wizards of the Coast. I genuinely want them to improve. I think that if they started working on adventures and campaign settings where they focused on crafting adventures that were more in the OSR style, that had a lot more variety in terms of what players can do, that had a lot more freedom in terms of how they could go about it, they would actually find a lot more success. But because they write adventure after adventure after adventure in this book in the way that they do, they're teaching new dungeon masters that this is what D&D is. And I think that's wrong. There is a whole universe of D&D adventures out there, both published and put out for free on people's blogs, that are vastly better than what I'm seeing in this book. It looks to me like, for the time being, the independent D&D and RPG scene is going to continue to have to lead the way and innovate in terms of figuring out the best way to create these kinds of adventures. And Wizards of the Coast will, hopefully, someday catch up. All right, thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time.